So I would love to start by asking you all, what brought you and your family to the Napa Valley, what year that was, and also we started talking earlier about what was your first vintage, as well as what that varietal was. So Jim, let's start with you.
Thanks for letting me be first. You rat.
Because you're really good at that.
I was a lawyer in Los Angeles for 26, almost 28 years, and about half. And we were making shopping centers for a man called Ernie Hahn. At one time, we had Ernie had my boss and a very close friend. We shot birds together, and flying in his airplane, and fished at his cabin in Idaho. And he said, you know, I'm on about his sixth shopping center. He said, I want you to work for me. I said, Ernie, hey, we're pals. That's just not going to work. I says, anytime you want to fire me as your lawyer, well, okay. So in any event, to continue on with the story, fast forward, is that one time we had Barrett, Stearns, Collins, Gleason, and Kinney. That was the law firm, and I was the Papa Bear, and we were making new inroads of how to put shopping centers together. And they started out $2 million, and there were strip malls, and there were convenience malls, all of those smaller type of malls. And we ended up with something like 96 shopping centers. Can you believe that? In the western United States and some in the Midwest, but nothing beyond that. But Ernie Hahn was the shopping center. Everybody's heard of Eddie DeBartolo with the 49ers fame. A tremendous football team, and he had about 4 shopping centers. But Hahn had lots of shopping centers, and we were doing very, very interesting work. But I got bored to tears after a while. We were making a whole ton of money, but I just lost interest in doing that. But I had all these other guys doing all the work, and I was just kind of attending the parties and things. I got bored.
Is that what you're doing now?
Yes, boring you people, you know, not me. But in any event, I used to tell this story in the question and answers when we'd be out trying to sell our wine, and I thought it's getting too damn long, like this one. So I said, I gotta go and cut this short. So at the Q&A, somebody said, how did you get into the wine business? I said, well, I was a lawyer for 28 years, putting frowns on people's faces. Now I put smiles. Mm-hmm. And that's how I got into the wine business. Came up here to the valley, looked at it, and I've been a city boy all my life, and I said, damn, this is fantastic. Things grow out here. It isn't concrete, you know, and it's not high buildings. It's fantastic. The problem was this place was an absolute wreck. I mean, it isn't like it was, like it is now.
What was it before?
Huh?
What was it?
It was a very old, elegant lady that was very tired. It had ghosts and spiders in it, and that's all, other than about 100 of Joe Heitz's wine barrels. And I looked at that and I thought, my God, this is a mess. And I looked at Jade Lake, and it looks like they could have filmed the African Queen there, because, you know, the slime of crocodiles in it and thing. And I looked at the vineyard, it was all trash grapes, the whole thing. And I thought, boy. But then, being an incurable romantic, I look up at Mount St. Helena, I look at a mile of the Napa River there. I thought, hot damn, this is starting from ground level zero. What a fantastic place to commit financial suicide. So anyhow,
even then you knew that.
So anyhow, I negotiated for the thing, and we made our first wine in 1972, and it was a Johannesburger Riesling, and it was given to us by John Pershing, which is right on the oceanside slopes by Diamond Mountain in that area. Or I guess it wasn't on Diamond Mountain, but in any event, that wine, the nice thing about Johannesburger Riesling is you mush the grapes, and about 6 months later you're selling the stuff. Well, a man named Bob Balzer, who used to was a tremendous, one of the first marketing people, salesman for. He was not in the wine business, but he was a wine critic for the LA Times. So we had some wine down in Southern California. He bought a bottle of Johannesburger Riesling, and it won the Golden Eagle Award. That was our very first award. It was 6 months after we started mushing up grapes. You know, that's not too shabby to begin with. What else did I leave out? Huh?
76.
Oh, that comes later.
What was the Asian influence here?
The Asian, well, it was by a man named Jort Frank. Frank being his last name, and he, at least the story as I got it, was that he was a Manchurian. His dad, his father rather, not his dad, worked for the government, the Manchurian, and built part of the Manchurian Railway, and they just immigrated here to the United States, and he was very proud of the fact he was just about your size, Margaret, just
Very little.
shorter. It was what do they call it? Vertically challenged or something like that. So anyhow, and he and his wife, we had a 100 in the 1982. We had a 100-year anniversary of the founding of the winery in 1882 by Senator Alfred Tubbs. He was a state senator. And everybody came in costumes of the era, except for Mr. and Mrs. Frank, who came as the Emperor and the Empress of China. And they were spectacular costumes, you know. And he's the guy, and he and his wife actually built Jade Lake out here. And today we have brought... Bo went to the first huge wine tasting in Beijing 2 or 3 years ago, and he was so impressed with it. We've had these pagodas, and they were all run down and kind of crappy and whatnot. But he said, "Dad, we got to fix these up." And I said, "Sure, let's do that." So now he imported all these tiles from China, and it's spectacular. I don't know whether you'll have an opportunity to see them now, but if you don't, you'll come back. You did, and they're spectacular, absolutely spectacular. They have all these goofy ornamental birds and things that it took forever and a whole ton of money to build the things. But we have all of these Chinese people coming. They're between 30 and 40 people, and they go out taking things in their hands. Isn't that nice? You know, it's called wine. And they're 30 to 40 years old, and so what I'm trying to say is that is such an important thing culturally, that it's just been fantastic for us with these younger people. And I talked to our moderator Paula about it a little earlier today, and I said, "Hey, you know, I think it's happening all over the valley. Is that the people that are buying wine now aren't all guys with gray or silvery hair like myself and John. It's a younger group of people, and it's incredible. I mean, I look at you guys, and you're somewhere in between there, it seems to me. But it's just amazing to see these younger people doing it. So it's time to have somebody else talk about.
Thank you. Margrit.
We've got a wonderful person.
Well, I just want to tell you that Julia Child always said, you don't have to be great. You don't have to.
You don't have to be great.
No. Well, forget it. I am originally from Switzerland, and I came from Switzerland to South Dakota. No, you don't want to know where that is, and we probably don't. But anyway, so you can't imagine what a wonderful transition it was to come to Napa Valley in 1960. I'll let the details out, but it was really great. And from Switzerland, obviously we drank wine. We had wine as part of our life. You would think that children would have milk. No milk. We had a little water with a tablespoon of wine and a little sugar. That's how we grew up. As you grew older, a little less and less water. And so wine was part of my life. But you can't. In South Dakota, I remember one time in a restaurant asking for a glass of wine, and they brought me a little thimbleful of port. That was wine. So anyway, when I first came here, it smelled right. I grew up in the Canton Ticino, in the Italian part of Switzerland, and we had a similar vegetation. There were eucalyptus trees, which you smell. There was rosemary, there was thyme, and there were vines. So I felt very wonderful. The weather was good. We came here in April. It was green like today, and today it almost looks a little bit like Ireland. It's so green. So I started my life here in 1960, and in 1963 I took a part-time job at the Charles Krug Winery, which was actually founded in 1861, the oldest commercial winery in Napa Valley, I believe, and was taken on by the Mondavi family in 1943. And I was the only female in giving tours. We were making $2 an hour, and I would have gladly given them the $2, and I learned so much. And if it rained, we were sent home. So, it wasn't really a very well-paying job, but it's so much fun. And I had to prove myself, because all the other tour guides, and there were not that many visitors, but then to just have an elementary visitors in that direction, you needed 3 or 4 people, 5. Where gentlemen, retired school teacher, retired firemen, retired policemen, and so forth, and me. And in the morning when I came and I hung my coat up in the, it was the stock room, the whole thing was in a garage. This is 1963. There were maybe a little over 20 wineries, and a few guests came to visit the winery, but certainly not what the kind of tourism that we have today. And when I came in, these 5 men always quit talking because they always talked about me. And they were always saying, what has this world come to? Since when does a woman know anything about wine? So I felt very challenged. I read every book I could find on wine. I was terribly boring at home because I talked about nothing else. I took tasting classes with the Napa Valley Wine Library. I had some extension courses, and just bound and determined. I'm going to know a little bit about that, and I love the product, So anyway, I was then. Bob and his brother, obviously historically you remember, had a split. I never saw any of the Mondavis. I worked there 3 days, a week or 4 days, a few hours. And sometimes when a car went down the road about 90 miles an hour, they said, that's Robert Mondavi. But really never knew him. But then when he left the organization and built his own winery in 1966, the spirit left. He was a very creative personality that had connections with everybody, and great character to be with, and of course so wine imbibed that he could not talk about anything else. So when he left, the spirit left, but I didn't know why. The spirit was gone, and most of us left too. And I then joined Robert Mondavi Winery in 1967. Getting there by accident. When I left Krug, I started to paint again, and sort of did some plein air painting out there, and there was this construction going up with an arch and a tower, and we were about 6 or 7 so-called artists, and we found somebody in there that used to work here, Mr. Griswold, and gave us a tour, and he called me at home and said, Margrit, why don't you come and work with me again? It's same pay, $2 an hour, but it's a new winery. And I was there kind of at the inception, and it was a state-of-the-art winery at the time. We had stainless steel fermenting tanks. We had the French, the cellar with the French oak barrels that were at the time arranged in triangles with a little votive candle on each one. It was just a wonderful way to get introduced into a new winery. There was a bar full of enthusiasm. He had 12 acres at the time, and they were mostly Carignan grapes, and he bought the grapes from the neighbors. And then, of course, things progressed, and this personality, and we had a lot of visitors, and because I speak a few languages, I always had to take the French, Italian, the Germans around, and they came from many wineries of the world because they heard about this new winery that was built by Cliff May with a very kind of a Spanish colonial influence, which Bob felt was sort of fitting into the valley. So that's how I started, and as you know, later on I married the boss, and it's been great fun ever since.
Margaret, what was Bob's first vintage, and what was the
1966.
66?
And he made Cabernet Sauvignon. There was even some Pinot Noir and Johannisberg Riesling, which he then gave up. He always said that when he took some trips to Germany, that he felt we didn't quite have the climate in Oakville for the Johannisberg Riesling. And we made the Sauvignon Blanc, which then he renamed Fumé Blanc, and they got to be sort of a signature wine because Bob always felt that the Sauvignon Blanc had a great character. He loved the Sancerre, the Blanc Fumés, the Grave, the Sauvignon Blancs, and so forth. And he then fermented it completely dry, brought it up in the oak barrel, and had to give it a new name because before that Sauvignon Blanc didn't have a great name. If I hurt anybody's feelings, I hope I don't.
Not mine, so a little bit.
It had to be a signature wine, yes. Thank you.
Boots.
Well, we came up in the late 60s. What brought us to the Napa Valley? Wine. And I have to mention Al because he's the reason that I'm here. Al had a business in Southern California, in Los Angeles, and was completely bored. He was a very artistic man, very creative, and he had a business there for many years, and he just knew he had to find a change, but he had no idea what the change was going to be until he took a course at UCLA. He was into anything French. He took a lot of French classes at UCLA. Turned out that he spoke French quite well, and he was looking over the programs that were offered, and he saw one that was called Wine Appreciation. So he thought, wow, this sounds interesting. He liked wine. He was drinking Paul Masson and thought it was fabulous. And so he took the course, and the more he got into it, and of course the course was all about mostly French wines and wines from Europe. And he thought, oh, this is what I want to do. And he even talked to the teacher, and the teacher said, no, just forget it. And so Al said, no, I don't want to forget it. And so he took a trip over to actually Bordeaux. And because he spoke French pretty well, he went into the fields, and he was talking to the workers. And the more he talked, and the more he heard and did his homework, found out that the best place to make Cabernet Sauvignon, which is all he was ever interested, was Napa Valley. And so he thought, oh, a great retirement. This is what he thought. He'll just grow grapes. Well, he was good friends with a gentleman who started Ridge. And they said, well, no, look, Al, if you're going to grow grapes, you're just going to make wine. So first thing he said was, well, I don't know anything about wine. Well, you learn. You can always hire a good winemaker. So came up here to the Napa Valley, and he was shown a lot of property all throughout the valley. Well, Al had an idea of what he wanted, and it was only hillside. He totally was not interested in any valley floor. He kind of had the idea of Burgundy. Romanée-Conti is kind of on a hillside if you visited Burgundy. And so he was shown all this property, and nothing hit him until he was shown this piece of property up on Diamond Mountain. It was raw land. we found a few plantings that was probably put there during Prohibition, but basically there was nothing there. But on the hillside, I hope you'll all come visit sometime, where our winery is now. He overlooked, we're kind of in a bowl, and he knew why, I don't know, but he knew this was it. He had no idea how much could be cleared for vines. He didn't even know what an acre looked like. I'm not sure we still do. But he did consult a couple of people here in the valley that he respected about growing Cabernet in the northern end, which is Calistoga, because there was not a lot of Cabernet here in the Calistoga area. And he was told by the people that he consulted that, yeah, it's a good place for Cabernet. So he did. He bought the land. And we had no idea at the time. I don't know how familiar you are, but we have a small vineyard. We have what we call terroir. We have different soils. And we had no idea at the time that we did have these different soils that are only 60 feet apart, but Al was doing the work himself, and he was clearing the land, and we have a creek, this Diamond Creek, that meanders through, and he would be on one side, and he'd be clearing the land, and he'd come down, and my God, his clothes were all white. Well, that's our volcanic hill. And then he'd go on the other side of the creek, and he'd go up the hill there, it wasn't terraced at the time, and he'd come down and he would be red like your sweater. So he said, oh boy, something's going on here. Well, he had the land analyzed, and yes, fortunate, we left out. And so he kept all the vineyards separate, which was somewhat unknown at the time because we only had 20 acres, and we were questioned, or he was, what are you doing? I mean, a little 5-acre vineyard, and you're bottling it separately. And but he did. I mean, Al knew what he wanted, and he did it. And so that's what brought us here. We planted in the late 60s. 1972 was our first release. So that means that next year, and I think, Jim, you're 72, it's going to be 40 years. Mm-hmm. I think it's been an incredible 40 years, and I feel fortunate that I was married to Al, and I'm here now.
Absolutely. I remember very clearly the first time that I actually went up and introduced myself to Al, and this is after being at a wine store in New York. And all of a sudden I realized that's the property in high school that we would go skinny dipping in all the time. There was a fabulous pond. And I said, God, I've got to come clean. I used to do, I know, you've been doing that for years. So I'm like, oh, God, I thought it was such a great secret. He was very funny. Oh, God. John.
Well, there's something in common here because I, too, was bored. I was living in Chicago, and I was working for an educational publishing company, school books, and for 23 years in marketing and long-range planning, and it was a staff job, and so I could do a lot of research, but I couldn't decide anything, and so I think it was 69 or so, 68, 69, when I was first exposed to wine, and of course it was Lancer's Rosé and Matousse, which is where I started. And then in '70, I decided that I would, with my boredom, that I, for the first time, thought I might be doing something on my own and not remain with this company. So I applied to my personal life what I was doing with the company, and I read and researched a lot about wine, and particularly here in California. And as a result of that, I resigned in 1972 and brought our family here, and I bought a vineyard. There were only 2 realtors in 1972 in St. Helena. Jimmy Warren was one of them. And I spent a couple of days with him, and I kept saying, like Al, I said, on the basis of what I've been reading and everything, I really would like to have a hillside vineyard. I think your odds are improved in wine quality, and that's what I want. Finally, on the second or third day, he said, there's an old vineyard down in the Stag's Leap area, and he's had it on the market for 2 or 3 years. He might take an offer. So as soon as I drove in and I saw the exposures, and some of you were there yesterday, I really got excited about this. It's like when you're buying a house and you all of a sudden you see this, you haven't been in it all, so you think right off the bat, that's the one I like. Well, that was my impression. And with getting a hold of neighbors, farm advisors, others, we tested. The only Cabernet that had been planted in what is now the Stag's Leap district was planted by Nathan Fay in 1961 against the advice of the University of California, Davis. They said, oh, it's much too cold, Cabernet isn't going to do well there. Well, he was a very stubborn guy, and he planted it nonetheless, and he made homemade wine. He sold to Joe Heitz and others, and I remember going over to dinner one night in '75, and I didn't know very much about wine because I was absorbed with the vineyard. For the first 6 years, I just developed the vineyard and replanted, and really gave up the notion of getting into wine. But we were sitting at dinner, and Nathan brought out his 1968 Cabernet. And even though I didn't really know anything about wine, I have to tell you that it was an experience I'll never forget, because it was simply delicious. You know, wine, like food, is supposed to taste good. I mean, don't you think? Well, this really tasted good, and I'll never forget it. And I learned a couple of years later that Warren Winiarski of Stag's Leap Wine Cellars had tasted that same homemade wine that Nathan had made. And as a result, he bought the property next door. And that was the beginning of Stag's Leap Wine Cellars. So from then on, it wasn't until 1978 when I made our first wine. And after taking a semester course at Napa College and some others, and I remember that I was looking for a winemaker. And meantime, I had taken this course up in Napa College, and the instructor was Margrit. And I got the first A+ that I've ever gotten in my academic career. And about 6 weeks later or so, she came knocking on my door, applying for the job as winemaker. So you see, it's a tainted grape. I think she knew all the time she was going to apply. But she, as a matter of fact, she's outstanding. She went on to form her own business as a laboratory and has done an outstanding job here in the Valley in St. Helena. So that's really my story.
And your first vintage was?
1978. It was from our hillside that I developed, and it was the grandfather of Hillside Select. We didn't put Hillside on the label until '83, but that was our first one.
Well, I always say in this valley there are those who created a dream and there are those who bought a dream. And I think you can see just from this, these are all incredible people that have created a dream and made it come true. So.